Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to George Croft's American Music Show. Today, we are diving into the life and career of June Carter, so stick around. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a huge announcement on the show this week. As many of you know, I've been working with Plaid Dog Recording in Boston to start work on my next studio album, which the campaign for is live. So if you want to donate to the campaign and help us make this next album a reality, please go to my Instagram page, and the link in my bio, you'll find the donation page there. And on that page, you will also find the first song of that album that we've already completed called Love is Blind. And I am so proud of how that song turned out, and I really hope you guys go check it out. Yeah, please give it a look, and while you're there, help us make this album a reality. Thank you very much for your support. Ladies and gentlemen, this episode of the show is brought to you by the Marysville Barber Parlor at 414 4th Street in Marysville. I am an absolute snob when it comes to my barbershop experience. I like to walk in. I like there to be cool stuff on the walls, cool vibes, good conversation, usually a free beer in the fridge, and they don't charge you an arm and a leg, and they do a killer job. So it is my kind of spot. I love hanging out in there. And for a limited time, if you walk into the Marysville Barber Parlor and tell them that George Croft's Music Show sent you, you will get $10 off your first haircut. So go get yourself $10 off a killer haircut with our friends down at the Marysville Barber Parlor. Thanks for watching the show. So June Carter is another just monumental character in the story of American music. And I feel like, especially in kind of the zeitgeist of, popular culture, she doesn't get the credit that I think she deserves for some of the stuff that she went through. Like, everyone talks about June Carter in the context of Johnny Cash, so like Johnny and June and their love story, which was obviously notable. But her life before Johnny and during their marriage was full of things that she deserves a lot of credit for weathering, and for just being this kind of a grounding figure for not just Johnny Cash, but lots of people in the music industry. She was really kind of this matriarchal character for country music for decades. And like I said, I think she deserves a little bit more credit and love from the fans for some of the stuff in her story here. But so it starts out, she's born into the Carter family, who are already, like, she's born into show business. Like, she didn't have aspirations to do anything else. She was always, show business oriented, because she's born. So the original Carter family trio that we talked about a couple of weeks ago in the Jimmy Rogers episode, when they go to the Bristol Sessions, it's A.P. Carter, his wife Sara, and Sarah's cousin Maybelle. And Maybelle was married to A.P. Carter's brother Ezra. So they're kind of this, family unit. And when they go to the Bristol Sessions, obviously it goes really well. And, we talked about that a little bit in the Jimmy Rogers episode, about how it sort of launches them into fame, and they're selling records, and they're one of the founding families of country music. And at the same time, the record business is developing right alongside they are part of the success of the record industry. Like the kind of hillbilly music market that hadn't really been tapped into, because you got to remember, before them and Jimmy Rogers, first of all, record technology in general was brand new. And once they got it kind of established and they realized they could sell more than just opera or classical music, that there was this whole market for kind of cultural music in the American, East, once they realized that market was there and the Bristol Sessions happened, it's a quick rise to fame and success here. And eventually A.P. Carter and Sara, they get divorced, and that original trio kind of falls apart. And they, but Maybelle, to her credit, decides, no, this is working, I'm going to keep going. So Maybelle ends up, filling that gap with her and her daughters, and, one of which being June Carter. And I think June makes her Opry debut, or first appearance, I think she was like 6 years old or something. And she just, once she started, she never stopped. And she seems to just have been made for this kind of thing. She was so outgoing and so just dynamic, and she had this great sense of humor, and she had this voice that would just cut through the noise and kind of It was really easy to pick up on the mic. And she was always like, just had this, like I said, she had a great sense of humor doing physical comedy and doing sketches and skits and stuff on the Opry. And she just shined as a character here. And she keeps that going all the way through, you know, from the time she's 6 or whatever. Like that never stops for her. And the first time Johnny Cash sees June Carter in person, because you got to imagine this is like, you know, Johnny is growing up hearing June on the radio, like as part of the Carter sisters. Like they're, you know, they were famous the whole time. Johnny is on his come up. And then, you know, his story that we've covered on the show in the past, where, you know, after he joins the military and, you know, goes to Europe and he's gone for a few years, comes back and gets married, the whole time he's hearing June Carter on the radio. And the first time he saw her was for his high school, you know, senior trip. They took them to the Opry. And he remembers seeing June on stage and just thinking she was the cutest thing ever. And, you know, his crush on her, if it hadn't started already, it definitely picks up steam there. But they don't meet in person for years after this. So, and in that time, June Carter gets married to Carl Smith, who was another Opry member, who's famous for, you know, songs like Country Bumpkin and a bunch of others. And their relationship is pretty, it's kind of that, her first whack at marriage was really kind of the classic showbiz arc of like, everybody thinks they should be together. They started off with all this chemistry on stage and on TV, and everybody, you know, he was this clean cut guy and she's America's, you know, favorite country sweetheart on the Opry. And they do get married and they have a daughter together, but you can kind of see their arc of their relationship through their TV performances. Cause like the comedy between them would get kind of weird. And towards the end, it got less and less funny. And Carl is kind of taking jabs at her and kind of putting her down a little bit. And she does a great job, like laughing it off and keeping the show going. But you can kind of start to spot the cracks in the relationship there towards the end. And, it sounds to me like Carl Smith did not think of June as like this co-star character that was going to go on to have this, you know, great career of her own. He kind of expected her to sort of take a back seat and raise babies and kind of not draw a lot of attention to herself, which was not the person that June Carter was at the time. And so obviously that caused a lot of friction. So they end up getting divorced, which at the time, you know, now it's easy to be like, oh, celebrities getting divorced. You know, okay, that happens all the time. Well, this is the, you know, 50s. This is not something that you just do. And so when June Carter pulls the trigger on that deal and gets divorced, it's like that was a real statement that she, not just a statement, but like that was a very serious life decision that she did at her own social peril, sort of like she had to deal with people, you know, calling her names and putting her down in public and kind of stuff because divorce was not an acceptable institution at that time. And, but she does it anyway. And she starts going to New York to learn for acting lessons. And she keeps that up. So she's flying to New York, you know, on Sunday or whatever, doing her classes and working in, you know, groups and becoming a movie star sort of. And then she would fly back, work the Opry on the weekend, and then fly back to New York. And she's doing this with a baby in tow. Like, so, and, but it starts to go pretty well here. And she's starting to pick up steam. She's starting to pick up momentum. She's at one point, during that same time, she's working with Robert Duvall. He was like part of that same troupe coming up. And, like long before he's ever famous, right? Like this is, her and Robert Duvall actually became really good friends and kind of stayed in touch the whole time. And they end up in a movie together many years down the road. But anyway, but they had met back then. And that kind of comes to a screeching halt when June finds herself pregnant again, because she had met a guy named Rip Nix, who I've joked about in previous videos. They're like, that's one of the coolest names I've come across in all in American music history, old Rip Nix. And they have a very short-lived, you know, well, it's actually not as short-lived as her first marriage, actually, but they get married because she got pregnant. And again, like, to Rip Nix's credit, he doesn't seem to be pressuring her as hard to stop working. He seems to have been relatively supportive. And you know, their relationship falls apart when Johnny Cash re-enters the scene. So I think she got married to Rip Nix here. Let's see here. So it would have been, let's see here. She got divorced in 1956 from Carl Smith. And then she gets married, in 1957. So like a year later. Like I said, she got married because she got pregnant. And so that's 1957. She gets married to Rip Nix. And at the same time here, this is where Johnny Cash is, like I said, he's re-entered the chat here on the Opry stage. And like, I think he met June in 1956, and that, like, backstage at the Opry, they officially meet in 1956. And you got to remember, he's married to Vivian Liberto at the time, and, you know, somewhere along the line of having 4 children with her. And but he meets June, they kind of hit it off, and they become friends. So and then as their careers are running next to each other here, this is where June Carter's life starts to get really complicated, because, like I said, she already got divorced once. She got through that, and she kind of just kept on keeping on. The getting pregnant the second time did sort of derail her acting for a while. Like, she wasn't getting small bit parts in shows or anything anymore. Because I think she was on a couple episodes of Gunsmoke, and or at least one episode of Gunsmoke, and a couple other things. But that does not keep up after she gets pregnant the second time. But her music career keeps going, and she keeps making her Opry, appearances and things like that. And then, so cutting to, like I said, over to Johnny Cash's story here, is you got to remember, Johnny Cash is not in top form here. I mean, his career is taken off, but he is knee deep in opioid addiction and cocaine and everything else. Like, Johnny is doing the rock star life, and he's running around on Vivian, like, all over the country. He's having affairs, notably later here, including with June Carter. But so his home life is super tumultuous, and he's in the throes of addiction here. But, and when June talks about, like, when she started to realize that she's fallen in love with Johnny Cash, it wasn't like she wasn't like, oh, and then we fell in love and it was great. It scared her, and she realized it was this thing that she just couldn't stop from happening. And oh my God, is this going to complicate things? And this is like she fought it for as long as she could, because she knew what a big deal that was, because he was still married and she was still married. And they're, and then they start touring together, and they start, their careers kind of parallel up, and they're on tour together. And this, like I said, does not help their respective relationships. And it's during this time, I think it's 1963, so this is a few years in here. This is where June Carter writes Ring of Fire. And I mean, a lot of people know that now, but I feel like for a good chunk of the population, people don't realize that June Carter wrote that song. And technically, she co-wrote it with Merle Kilgore, who we talked about on a previous, on the Fair and Young episode. Merle Kilgore is the guy that Fair and Young had that funny story with, where he was like calling him at the bar, telling him that he had made dinner and what time you're going to be home, because Merle was living in the lake house with Fair and Young at the time. And but anyway, so same guy, same circles. This is all tied together. And if you want more of that story, it's on the Fair and Young episode. But so she writes Ring of Fire. And if you go back and listen to that song in that context, it is about her feeling helplessly kind of slipping into love with Johnny Cash, and how it feels kind of sinful, and it's like, it's not supposed to be happening this way. And it's sort of it's kind of a reflection on her worrying about her, like, Like it's almost hellfire kind of a thing that she's like worried about. I mean, poetically in the song. And but yeah, so in that context, you know, like she writes this song, and you've got to know that Rip Nix is not happy about this, because I'm sure at this stage of the game he knows what that song is about, because she's not writing any songs about him at the time. And so she writes the song, but she doesn't record it, and she ends up, I think she gave it to her sister Anita, I think, is the first one that did that. And Johnny Cash heard it and was like, I'm going off of memory on this story here, but I'm pretty sure Anita releases the song. Johnny Cash hears it, and this is where he had a dream and like heard that song with the Mexicali horns and the, you know, the kind of mariachi sound that we know now. And he told Anita, like, look, like if this song isn't a hit in 6 months, I'm going to do it. Because he didn't want to step on her toes right off the bat and cut the song, even though he was excited about it. So that song is not the hit that Anita wanted it to be, and Johnny Cash decides, yep, we're going. And it is a giant success. And that's, I can you imagine being like either one of them, Rip Nix or Vivian Liberto, hearing Johnny Cash out there singing a song written by June Carter about him, while they're clearly having an affair off on the side. Like they were on the road together constantly. They clearly loved each other. There was this whole, you know, the two third wheels in either of the relationship saw the writing on the wall at this point. And it's, you know, it does not get better at all. So that was in 1963. And, you know, June and Rip don't get divorced until 1966. Now, the weird part of the timeline here is that so June divorces Rip Nix in 1966, specifically because she's in love with Johnny Cash, who is still married to Vivian Liberto at the time. So June gets divorced. It wasn't like they both got divorced at the same time and kind of planned this thing out. It was like her marriage fell apart. She knew she was in love with Johnny Cash, and she decides, you know what, I can't do this. We're going to get divorced, and kind of at least clear the air on her half of the equation, which again that could not have been an easy decision to make. Cause you got to think, like, Rip Nix, you know, her daughters call him Daddy Rip. Her first daughter calls him Daddy Rip. And, you know, now she's got this younger daughter too. And that could not have been an easy decision for June Carter to make here, especially because there wasn't, and like I said, Johnny Cash is knee deep in addiction at the time. It wasn't like he was this stable option that she could just jump over to. Like, the decision, knowing that she was in love with Johnny Cash enough to end the current marriage that she was in the context of he's still married and he's addicted badly. Like, he's nodding off during shows and slurring words and screwing things up, missing shows. Like, Johnny Cash is not in good shape during this time. So for her to make that decision in that way, in that context, to me is pretty wild. That, you know, that she knew that's what she wanted. She just wasn't sure how she was going to pull it off yet. And she knew that the marriage she was in wasn't going to last. So she jumps in 1966. Johnny Cash doesn't actually get divorced until 1968, although I think him and Vivian separated somewhere in 1967, because this is where another crazy story here, that it's a crazy Johnny Cash story, but June's part in it is easily overlooked, I think, because in 1967, I think in October of 67, I could be wrong about that, but this is where you get the Nickajack cave story with Johnny Cash, where like he is just pilled out of his mind. He's basically thinking about ending his own life. He walks into this cave that there's this cave system, I guess, that he enjoyed hiking in, but he just kind of wanders in there and just starts walking, and kind of, obviously probably pilled to the gills and not really doing a good job of tracking himself. And he gets several hours into this walk and his flashlight dies. So now he is like a mile into this cave system or more in the dark. And Johnny Cash tells this crazy story about just like clawing his way, trying to find his way back to the opening of the cave. And at one point lays down and sort of says his like goodbye prayer of like, all right, I'm going to die in this cave, I guess. And kind of comes to grips with the fact that he's going to die. And he lays down and he talks about feeling, a presence that tells him, nope, you're not done yet. Get up, keep going. And he does. And right as he does that, he sees a little pin needle of light way off in the distance. And that was the entrance to the cave. But he's also exhausted at the time. So he manages to claw his way towards the front of the cave. He's not sure how close he got. He got pretty much to the entrance of the cave, like close enough to the entrance of the cave. And he passes out. And he wakes up to June Carter with a wet like napkin, like wiping off his face. And they have this moment where she was like, you're almost dead, aren't you? And he's like, yeah. And to me, that story is obviously a powerful one for Johnny Cash because he's having this religious experience and kind of finding new meaning to life in that moment. But for June's part of the story, talk about being a ride or die. Like she had just gotten divorced. Johnny is still married to Vivian at the time, but they're clearly spending a lot of time together. Johnny and June are a pretty much established couple at this point because they're touring everywhere together, and one marriage has already fallen apart, and the other one is right behind it. But June is the one who had just ended this marriage to Ripnicks for this guy, Johnny Cash, who is, like I said, just knee deep in addiction and still tied up in a complicated marriage and the whole shebang. But when she hears that he had walked off into the cave, her impulse is to go after him and go find him. And she does. I mean, I wonder what it would have been like to be June Carter that morning and knowing that Johnny had walked off. And she didn't know how far he had gotten. She didn't know, like, I wonder how far into the cave she would have been willing to go to find him. It doesn't sound like she had to go that far, but like I said, talk about a ride or die. She's just like, oh, he's in there. Let's go get him. And she goes and finds him and like brings him back to life. And ends up, he does manage to get clean after that for a while. And so after that happens, this is where you get the Folsom Prison performance, where I think it was January of 1968, I think. Her and Johnny go to Folsom Prison. This is where, again, Johnny's career has kind of slacked a little bit, but he's still got enough pull to make this decision to get the record company to agree to do a live recording in a prison. And so Johnny and June goes with him. They fly out to California and go to Folsom Prison and put on this, legendary show. And June had told Johnny that, that she would marry him if he cleaned his act up and if he could be sober for a while. And he does. And that transformation in the cave was a big one. And, for as addicted as he was, it's a major turnaround moment. And June is a huge part of that equation. And, but anyway, so they do the Folsom Prison show in 1968. And then they end up, I think, February. So like pretty soon after that, I think Folsom Prison was in January. And then in February is where Johnny Cash proposes to her on stage at the Opry. And it's kind of an awkward exchange because Maybelle and Anita and everybody, like all the Carter sisters are on stage with Johnny Cash when he sort of stops the show and proposes to June in front of the cameras and the crowd and everybody. And June is kind of extremely caught off guard in that moment because she wasn't expecting it at all. And she kind of, at first she's kind of motioned to her mom, like, start playing something, like, get me out of this. Like, I don't have to give you an answer right this second. Like, let's put the show on. And Johnny kind of stops and he's like, no, like, I need an answer. Like, are you going to marry me or not? And so she says yes, like in that moment. And, she laughs about it later, but I think what's funny to me is like, it's like probably the one moment where June Carter was caught off guard on stage, that she had handled every curveball that could have ever been thrown to her, but in that moment, it rattled her, and she ends up saying yes, kind of like, yes, and even though she did mean it, and she did fully, she saw that coming. She intended to marry him anyway. But yeah, that on stage interaction is just funny to think about. But and then they originally, to kind of give you an idea of the shape that Johnny Cash was in by that time, that June's daughters loved him, and they were, he was locked in being a good, father figure to them already at that point. And they were kind of starting to kind of meld their two families together. And like, their Johnny Cash's daughters from the previous marriage had a little bit of a harder time, I think, with that transition than the Carter daughters did. But they managed to make a family out of the deal. And I guess the original plan, so this is in February, the original plan was they were going to like wait till June and, and put on this big wedding in the summertime kind of thing, and like kind of make a bigger to do out of it. And it was June Carter's daughters that were like, why are we waiting until June? Like, let's just do this thing. Like, just go get a marriage license. We'll just get married at the church up there. And then you guys can come have the reception here at the lake house. And then us girls will grab our suitcases and we'll leave you guys here for the weekend. And we'll be back at school on Monday. And, which June was surprised by, obviously, but that is what they end up doing. So they get married. Let's see here. So he proposed to her on February 22nd. And then they get married March 1st. So like, a couple weeks later. and which I thought was sweet, that like her kids were already just fired up and excited about it. And like, what are we waiting for? Let's do this thing. And so they do that wedding at the urging of their kids, which I thought was, like I said, which I thought was very sweet. Now, this is where we start to see an interesting change in June Carter, because like I said, her first divorce was because Carl Smith wanted to kind of put her fire out a little bit and wasn't giving her the room to shine that she felt like she deserved. When she marries Johnny Cash, she does away with a little bit of that. And like, you see her, because they are immediately like joined at the hip, like anywhere he goes, she goes. And like, they're performing together. They're one kind of unit initially here. But she starts saying things in interviews like, oh, I don't need to be a star. I'm happy to just be Johnny Cash's wife. And a lot of people were kind of like caught off guard by that. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's not your MO at all. Like, it was weird to a lot of people to hear her say that kind of thing. And, but she does, and that does kind of define their relationship for a bunch of years here in the middle. And, like I said, so they get married, what was that, 68? And then they are having successes through the 70s here. And then, they have John Carter Cash is born, I think somewhere in here. I got to find the year that John Carter is born here. I think it was, oh man, I don't have it in here, but he's born in the 70s here. And somewhere, I think it was in, let's see here, it was in the late 70s that Johnny Cash relapses on paint pills. I think he had a back surgery or something. He had a medical procedure that kind of knocks him off the wagon, and he ends up fully pilled up again. And this is a pretty dark chapter in the story of Johnny and June, because she does everything she can to kind of keep him on the rails, but it's just a losing battle. And this is the period of time where June talks about it with a lot of shame, because she felt like a bit of an enabler for time, which, you got to cut the spouses of addicts. You got to cut them all the slack you can, man. It's a tragic time in her story. But she tells stories about like how I saw her say in a clip that she became a thief, that she was stealing pills for Johnny, and she was stealing hotel room keys and, things like that. And just did kind of betraying herself in a lot of ways that did not sit well with her. I think that during this time, she does really try to put her foot down, and it causes a lot of tension. And John Carter has said in the past that they were almost divorced. Like, it almost ended their marriage. That I think he said somewhere that it was like they were almost divorced except for the paperwork being done. And which should tell you a lot about how bad that must have been for all the shit that June Carter had gone through at that time for Johnny Cash, and the changes she made as a person and the things she was persevering through all that. For her to almost pull the plug on her marriage to Johnny Cash, that must have been awful. But they don't, and she decides, they do like a vow renewal in here, and at some point something terrible happens. Like, and some people, it's left vague by lots of people that were involved on purpose, because Johnny does something. I don't know. There is some bad event that happens that clearly causes a shift in June where she's like done. And this must have been just prior to the almost getting divorced. But it is enough of a kick in the ass that they decide to do an intervention for Johnny. And it works. This is one of the few times in American music history where, like, there's a family intervention, Johnny goes off to the treatment center, and it works. That he, like, it just seems like a little blip in his story where, like, he relapsed for a few years, but then he goes to rehab, and then it works, and he's fine after. But that was clearly a very tough time in their marriage. I saw John Carter tell some kind of heartbreaking stories about this, where like he would, I mean, he's a little kid at the time, and he's watching Johnny Cash take naps, and he would recognize that his breathing would like stop. He would breathe all the way out and then not breathe again for a while, and then kind of just suck a bunch of air back in. And that's kind of how he's sleeping. And there's a moment where John Carter is sitting there listening to his dad take a nap, and Johnny Cash breathes all the way out and then doesn't breathe back in. And thank God that his son was in the room and paying attention, because he runs and gets June Carter and is like, "Dad's not breathing. We got to do something." And they end up like wrestling him into the bathtub and spraying cold water on him and kind of jarring him back. And he does wake up. But that's the kind of, this is part of this darker chapter of, like, poor John Carter is having to watch his dad fight through some of this stuff. And anyway, but like I said, like soon thereafter, they pull this family intervention, and he agrees to go to treatment, and it actually does stick. And the later years of their, from then on out, basically, he kind of gets his act together here. But at the same time, you got to imagine the part of this that kind of adds context to it for me, for June going through all this stuff. In the later years of her life, she starts back up with her solo work, and she's dropping albums, and she's winning Grammys, and she's getting recognized again for her own star power. And that, I think, is like, that was always in her. So to see that that's what she had in the tank the whole time, and she was keeping that kind of, like, you see how much of herself she was regulating for Johnny's sake, which is, again, strange, because she refused to do that for Carl Smith or Rip Nix, for that matter. And so, like, knowing that she had that in the tank and she could have gone on and been a success on her own, and for her to still not give up on Johnny Cash in those dark years where, terrible things are going on, is I think it's just a further testament to her as a person, and that she didn't quit on him when she could have, and she could have, succeeded on her own and left him to, basically die in his own problems. But nope, she's the kind of woman that's going to go walk into whatever cave you wandered off into and find you and drag you out of there and nurse you back to health over and over again, and then be willing to do it again a few years later. And but yeah, like I said, I think it's easy to overlook June's part in Johnny's story for those reasons, because he's over there at the time, And also during that time where things aren't super great, they're still performing together, but they've gone from playing sold out, arena shows to now they're playing like small clubs with like a couple hundred people in there. And there's, many years here where like you'll see like marquees out in front of a diner that say Johnny and June, Cash. And and that, it's kind of like the dark ages of Johnny's career where it kind of like drops off and he's not on the radar as much while he's going through some of this stuff. And his drug use was a huge part of that equation. And but then Johnny Cash gets a resurgence when he joins the Highwaymen, and that was born of a lot of things. So like you can imagine that Johnny and June's house had become this kind of gathering place for all kinds of people. And like they were inviting like new unknowns up to the house to come sit around and do these like, jam sessions and picking guitars and just trading songs around. And that becomes kind of this laboratory for new music acts, and you get lots of names in there. And like this is even where like Chris Christopherson is one of them. So like in his story where he had, remember Chris Christopherson is like this Rhodes Scholar, master's degree holding dude that just cut ties with his whole life to move to Nashville and write songs. This is the period of time that we're in, is where he's, going over to Johnny Cash's house to play these new songs that he wrote. And June Carter was a big part of kind of staying in Johnny's ear about him and being like, hey, this Chris kid he's on to something here. And she did that for him and many, many, many other people. And she would call them her babies. Like she was like, Chris Christopherson was one of her babies. And that was kind of her musical babies that she would like take care of and like, help launch their careers and get them in the right rooms with people. And she was handing off their, tapes to people to listen to. And she was a real advocate for the next generation of pickers that were coming up. And like it's somewhere in here, you get that story about Chris Christopherson landing a helicopter on the lawn at their house because he had a tape that he wanted to give Johnny. Some people say that story's not true, but I've heard Johnny Cash and June Carter tell it, so I don't know how much embellishment's going on there. But anyway, that's kind of the, and then same thing with like Waylon Jennings and Willie Nelson and all these people. Like they're all part of this scene where all these people are just ending up at Johnny Cash's house. It reminds me of Jim Croce's house, although Jim Croce's house was like that before Jim was really famous. But yeah, that's where you had like the James Taylors and, Bonnie Raitt and all those guys just like showing up to Jim Croce's house to share songs and stuff. It was a similar kind of vibe at Johnny Cash's house. And, I think it is at one of these jam sessions that they start to get the idea for the Highwaymen. And then they play a show together called The Highwaymen. And then they decide, you know what, we got to keep this thing going. And it leads off to 10 years of touring together as the Highwaymen. And this is a weird time for June because she does not get stage time here. They don't bring her on stage to sing at all. And despite the fact that I think all of the members of the group would have been okay with that. Nobody was like trying to keep June down at all, but they just couldn't find a way to work it into the show. And it doesn't sound like June fought very hard to become part of the show. I don't think that's really what she wanted, I guess. I mean, like I said, despite the fact that she could have, but they would often, spotlight June in the crowd, and Johnny would be like, oh, there's my wife, June Carter Cash, and she wrote, Ring of Fire. And he was very good about every show, picking her out, giving her credit, like talking her up. And so Johnny did a good job of making her feel included, despite the fact that she wasn't on stage during those years. And but like I said, that it must have been strange for her because she, like I said, her last albums that she wins Grammys for are after this is happening. So she's still over there networking, pumping up other artists, supporting Johnny, writing her own songs, doing, she's still cranking away over there with her same ferocity and her same talent, but she's just in the back seat sort of to Johnny again during this time. And, but then, I think it's in 1999, she does a solo album called Press On. And that, watching in a lot of just interviews and videos you find online following June Carter around, Press On was kind of her thing, which I've come to love. Like my thing is like ready, ready. Like I always say that to everybody. Oh, we're ready, ready, ready. Like that's kind of the thing I say. June Carter's was press on. Like, oh, we're just gonna press on, and here you are. You ready? Press on. And she would say that all the time, like it was her little catchphrase, and which is really emblematic of what she was like. I mean, she, every terrible thing that came her way, every bump in the road, every challenge, she's up, just got to press on and keep on going. And she was that kind of person for the people around her. Anytime anybody else was going through something hard, she was always like, it'll be all right. You're going to be fine. Just keep going, press on. And, to have somebody like that in your life for these young artists that were just going through it, I'm sure at the time must have just been a huge, source of confidence. And, if June Carter's telling you to keep going and you're going to make it, that must have just been amazing to have. And, she does other things too. Like she has these funny conversations with, like Ronnie Dunn and his wife show up to the house, and Ronnie Dunn tells a funny story about, I think, because he wasn't married at the time. She was just his girlfriend, but June throws her in the car and is like, we're going shopping, and like takes off and leaves with Ronnie Dunn's girlfriend for like several hours. And Ronnie Dunn is at the house with Johnny Cash, like recording music and kind of hanging out. And he's starting to wonder, like, where'd she go? And when his girlfriend shows back up, she's kind of pale and kind of almost scared looking. And come to find out, it's because June had gotten her in the car and been like, hey, Ronnie has what it takes to make it, and he could be a big star. You should know heading into this, they're all a little bit crazy. And if you're going to stick around for that, it is not going to be easy. So she wasn't like telling her not to do it. She was trying to give her a realistic picture of what she was getting into if she sticks with Ronnie Dunn. And she does. I mean, they do get married and they do stick together, but she tells that story looking back as like June Carter really giving her this kind of maternal moment of kind of warning her, like, you make sure you're ready for what you're getting yourself into here, which I think is, just more evidence of who June was as a person. Like, not only is she pumping these people up and trying to, help their careers along, she is also a taker of no shit. Like, she is going to say what's on her mind. She's going to give the advice she thinks she need. She was, I think, Willie Nelson, I think, said that she was, how did he say it? She was as smart as she was funny. And, but yeah, basically, or no, he said she was as tough as she was funny, and she was very funny. And, but like that's kind of more of that, like, she was this real true north character, and she was so supportive to everybody around her, but also very truthful. And, another part of that deal that I thought was really interesting. So when Johnny Cash went to rehab, that rehab center had like a course for the family members that I think they called it the codependency center. I think, where it was like basically teaching people how to navigate being an addict's like person that they rely on, and how to kind of navigate some of that. And she tells a story about like just the kind of stuff they would have them do, like flying kites and making pottery and painting things, and just kind of learning to be a kid again, to kind of sure them up for the road ahead with this person that they're married to who's addicted. And that does seem to have been really helpful for her. When you see the videos of her during that time, there's a new light kind of back in her eye, and it seems to have been a really positive experience for her. And it helps, obviously, that the rehab stuck, and that when Johnny Cash came out of that, he was much better off. And like John Carter talks about like having his dad back, and that he was back to his old self kind of thing, which is, tragic and sweet all at the same time. But yeah, like I said, so she, they get through all that, they get through the Highwaymen years, and she starts this, working on her solo stuff in 1999, and she wins a Grammy for Best Traditional Folk Album. And Johnny Cash through here, this is where he did the Hurt album, and so he's getting a little bit of his own success here going too. But he was very supportive, and he, to Johnny's credit, he doesn't put any energy into like trying to outshine June or not give her the credit. Like he really does seem to have been just fully supportive and very, very sweet and very like, excited for her success at the time. And, so, and then, and there's lots of footage from this time where she's in here making these albums. And, it's very, if you feel like you're watching her be vindicated, like cause she's still got it. She's still writing. She's still singing. She's still, she's playing her harp with, in front of the mic and, kind of laying down this old traditional sound. And John Carter co-produced that album, even though I think he made it sound like he had never done that before, despite growing up, kind of in that industry. So it's cool to see him on video, like knee deep in the process with his mom, who was on, she's in her 70s at the time. And, just kind of the creative process that they're still going. And she's just in command of the whole thing and like just knows what she wants here. She's kind of band leading and she's wrangling cats and kind of keeping everybody on track, and like I said, it turns out great. And she wins a Grammy for that one. And that was Press On. And then in 2003, so they had continued recording and they were still working on stuff, and she's enjoying some kind of later life success here. But then she has, it sounds like she had a heart valve surgery, and I think the surgery goes okay, but she's not feeling well, to where later after, and by the way, they record a bunch of songs. And then she kind of has this, tragic moment of like, oh, I don't feel very good. I got to go to the hospital. And John Carter remembers kind of getting her in the car and kind of waving her off kind of thing. And then she goes to the hospital and she dies from complications with that heart valve. And obviously if you look at the footage from the music industry when June Carter dies, good luck not crying watching all of that stuff, because everybody comes out of the woodwork to pay their respects and talk about what she meant to him and what a rock she was, and kind of the she really, you see the recognition and not just the recognition. It's not like, oh, she got the recognition she deserved. You see the real outpouring of love from the people that she touched and helped and like encouraged, and she was this real force for people's careers. And so when she dies, it is so sad. And like I said, and the footage from her funeral is just heart-wrenching. Like Johnny Cash is just devastated, obviously, because his health wasn't that great at the time either. And but it was every bit as painful as you might imagine. That like she was the, hey, press on, you're going to be okay person. And so when she dies, everybody's looking around for that, and it's not there. And so it's a very, very, very tragic, despite the fact, obviously, like she lived a long life, and it wasn't like some of these other tragedies that kind of catch everybody off guard, like Marty Robbins, with his heart attack when he was 50. But still, she leaves a hole in the country music scene that is not easily filled. And never will be, I should say. But and then obviously, famously, Johnny Cash dies just like a couple of months later. He was just a wreck without her. And Willie Nelson talks about during that time, that couple of months between, because Johnny Cash dies, I think he dies like 4 months after her or something. And but Willie Nelson tells a story about Johnny calling him just to talk, and he's like, yeah, we're talking about this song and that song, or this thing and that thing, but really he was calling me to get his mind off of the fact that June wasn't there. And it was, I mean, like I said, just so sad to watch, that kind of the tail end of the thing there, especially like, like watching them sing The Far Side Banks of Jordan. Good luck watching June Carter and Johnny Cash sing that close to her death and know she's going to die, like right around the corner. And they're singing that song about, like, if you don't know that song, go check it out, because it's a classic. But yeah, The Far Side Banks of Jordan, just watching them sing that to each other, knowing it's right around the corner. Oh, dude, good luck not crying while you're watching that. But anyway, so that is kind of how it shakes down, and Johnny Cash dies just a few months after her. and yeah, it kind of closes the book on a huge, just kind of a titan of the American music story that, like I said, I don't feel like she is as recognized or loved in posterity as she really should be, despite the fact that that album that she was working on, actually I think it was 2 albums, she wins posthumous Grammys for, which was cool. Like in I think in 2004, yeah, in 2004 she wins 2 Grammys, and I don't think it was 2 albums. So I think let me see this. It was Wildwood Flower, was the album, and yeah, she won 2 Grammys for it. But yeah, so she kind of, ends it on a high note here. I mean, obviously, anytime we see posthumous albums released, they get a lot of steam, and a lot of people win posthumous Grammys because it's like, oh, they recorded this right before they died and then it came out. Like, the same kind of thing happened for like Hank Williams and Jim Croce and all these other people that we've talked about that died while they were working. When their music comes out after they die, it's wildly successful because everybody wants to hear what their last piece of work was. And so that might have helped get her over the finish line for winning 2 Grammys, but even so, it's still classic works. I mean, if you go back and listen to it too, it's like she did not change her sound at all. She was the same June Carter singing the same great stuff kind of all the way through. And yeah, like I said, just a testament to her as a person. And I felt like, it was the whole context of her life, accomplishing the things that she did in spite of the curveballs that life threw her, and her ability to say no when she needed to and yes when she needed to, and knowing what battles to kind of fight through and which ones to not. That was she was a very special person in the American music story. So I'm glad we got to do an episode on her. So that is June Carter Cash. So thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next week.